ODSTs, or Orbital Drop Shock Troopers, are a special operations unit of the UNSC's Marine Corps. They specialise in feet-first drops from orbit. ODSTs were notorious for their high-risk, high-reward deployment strategies. Their methods of operation allow them to conduct missions against targets that more conventional forces would be unable to approach undetected. ODSTs are recruited from all three services within the UNSC, i.e. the Marine Corps, the Army and the Navy. Furthermore, they are a strictly all-volunteer fighting force. Every ODST candidate is a veteran from another special operations outfit, and therefore has already gone through at least 2 layers of screening and months of intense training. This doesn't count the years of training received before they volunteered for the ODSTs. There is no age or gender restriction. As long as the candidate meets the physical and mental requirements, they are guaranteed the opportunity to try out for the ODSTs. Once accepted into the unit, the training continues. ODSTs are trained in the use of the single-occupant exo-atmospheric insertion vehicle. This is a teardrop-shaped drop pod, protected with a ceramic skin coating, and it is the signature piece of the equipment used by the ODST. It's known for its high risk and intense heat, which has garnered the ODSTs the nickname Hell Jumpers. There have been several notable ODSTs over the decades, but today we are going to discuss one of the best and most honourable, First Lieutenant Melissa McKay. Lieutenant McKay was assigned to command the ODST battalion assigned to the famous UNSC ship the Pillar of Autumn, commanded by Captain Jacob Keyes. This was supposed to be to support the Spartan operation Red Flag, the operation that humanity hoped would end the Human Covenant War. Operation Red Flag, however, was interrupted by the invasion and subsequent fall of Reach. This resulted in the Pillar of Autumn fleeing into hyperspace and arriving at the then unknown Halo Ring, Installation 04. The Pillar of Autumn was heavily damaged during the battle for Reach, and had jumped not into the safety of empty space, but in fact it found itself fighting against more Covenant vessels. It was boarded, and Lieutenant McKay took part in the defense against the boarding actions. She helped defend the ship's experimental power plant along with the other ODSTs. During the fighting, she took a wound to her bicep, damaging the ODS-2 tattoo she had there. Eventually, her and her fellow ODSTs were ordered by their commander, Major Silva, to abandon ship, and as such, McKay led her platoon to their drop pods, and they dropped onto Installation 04. Upon landing, Lieutenant McKay held the 3rd highest position among the survivors of the autumn. Her superiors was directly Major Antonio Silva, but also Captain Jacob Keyes. Her primary role involved securing the crash site of the Pillar of Autumn, a task she executed diligently. McKay and the majority of her 130-person company successfully made landfall on the ring, with the lieutenant making landfall approximately half a kilometre from the designated landfall beacon. She was able to rendezvous with Major Silva by the time a temporary base of operations was set up, and she was briefed on the plan established by him and Wellesley, a Class C 4th generation dumb AI. McKay was ordered to take her company of ODSTs to Alpha Base, where she would ascend the cliffs to attack the Covenant occupiers from below. Meanwhile, Silva's forces would insert from above via Pelican dropship. McKay spent the entire night marching her troops across the plains to the foot of the base, and began her attack. B Company ascended up a steep hill to Alpha Base via a narrow winding path, all the while under grenade and plasma fire from above. The resistance began to slack as the Pelicans began the air attack, and eventually B Company found themselves at an entrance to the structure. McKay fired an M41 rocket launcher into the breach to clear out resistance, before entering the base unchallenged. Her company met Major Silva on the landing pads and confirmed that Alpha Base now belonged to the UNSC. It was here that McKay encountered the legendary Master Chief Spartan, John 117. Despite Major Silva's hostility towards John, McKay held a unique admiration for the Spartan. She recognised a depth that eluded others, and she empathised with the pain and sorrow visible in John's unarmoured moments. With the Master Chief deployed to the Covenant vessel the Truth and Reconciliation with the orders to rescue captured Captain Keyes, McKay was ordered to the crash site of the Pillar of Autumn, with the intention to raid the ship for sorely needed supplies. McKay deployed in the dead of night with the hope that darkness and intense rain would mask the movements of the Pelicans and troopers approaching. In the early hours of September 20th, the company attacked the Covenant defenders and began to eliminate them. The battle took several hours, though eventually McKay's forces were able to push the Covenant out of the ship or lock them in non-essential sections. For several hours, the ODSTs loaded up the Warthogs and Scorpion tanks before preparing to make their way back to Alpha Base. The lieutenant split up her forces into 3 temporary platoons, with McKay leading 3rd Platoon. She was tasked with defending the other Warthogs and tanks from ghosts and infantry. The convoy was attacked by the Covenant, and they attempted to fall back to Alpha Base. 3 Wraiths and several Banshees began to fire down on the UNSC ground forces. The UNSC managed to escape the harassing Covenant forces and make it back to Alpha Base, returning with much needed supplies. With Alpha Base reinforced, McKay was given responsibility of the defensive perimeter around the base. She preferred a 2+2 configuration for the patrols, meaning 2 Warthogs paired with 2 captured Ghosts to maximize firepower and fast retraction capabilities. She, along with several other ODSTs, saw and took prisoner of the wounded grunt, Yayap. Little did she know that Yayap would trigger an attack later on. McKay was at Alpha Base when the elite Spec Ops officer Zuka Zami and the other Sanghili attempted to infiltrate the base with the intention to find and eliminate Spartan 117, i.e. John. McKay organised the defence of Alpha Base, and after the attack she took the remains of Charlie 217, a Pelican dropship that was used by the Sanghili to infiltrate Alpha Base, and she set it up as though the ship had crashed, with the hope that the Covenant would come searching for it. McKay and her squads set up an ambush. The Covenant did indeed come, as per the plan, but it quickly went wrong when the Flood attacked. This was more or less humanity's first encounter with the Flood, and they were horrified. Lieutenant McKay was disturbed at the first sight of the Flood. Nevertheless, she managed to capture a combat form alive. This combat form was in fact the former Private Jenkins. Jenkins had initially been infected along with Captain Keyes during exploration of a Forerunner site. She, along with Major Silva, interrogated Jenkins, and they compiled the first tactical information that humanity had on the Flood. Jenkins was not entirely subservient to the Flood. Some of his humanity remained, and it was through this humanity that Jenkins was able to communicate an incoming Flood attack. McKay, using Jenkins' information, was able to prevent this attack. In preventing this attack, the UNSC forces bought enough time for an evacuation and a new plan. They were going to attempt to capture the Covenant vessel, the Truth and Reconciliation, and the Marines and ODSTs were successful in this. They quickly captured the ship with minimal casualties. Through several simultaneous surprise attacks on the vessel's primary hangar bay and via the gravity lift. However, McKay soon discovered that Major Silva intended to fly the ship back to Earth. A mostly intact Covenant vessel would be a wonderful prize to return home with. However, this was in clear violation of the Cole Protocol, and secondly, and far more importantly, it was quite clear to McKay that there were Flood infection forms aboard the vessel. What happened next is why I feel she is deemed worthy of consideration for the best and most honourable ODST. It was clear that Silva would violate the Cole Protocol and bring the ship back to Earth. Jenkins went berserk. He jerked on his chains, gibbering incoherently as the Marine Guards struggled to bring him under control. Jenkins had enough remaining mental faculties to attempt to sever the fibre optic cable that connected the bridge controls with the engineering deck, though he was unsuccessful as immediately restrained. But then suddenly, a number of Flood infection forms burst out of the vents. The battle lasted for less than a minute before all the Flood infection forms were killed, the vent was sealed, and the cover welded into place. But the attacks served to illustrate the concerns that McKay already had. The Flood were an extremely deadly virus, and it was naive to believe that they could be controlled by anything short of extermination. Lieutenant McKay used her status as XO to get through to Silva and gave a report of the attack. She finished by saying, "It's clear that the ship is infected, sir. I suggest that we put it down and sterilize every square centimeter prior to lifting up again." "Negative, Lieutenant," Silva replied grimly. "I have reason to believe that Halo is going to blow, and soon. Besides, I want some specimens, so see what you can do to capture some of the ugly bastards." "The Lieutenant is correct," Wellesley, the AI, put in dispassionately. "The risk is too great. I urge you to reconsider." "My decision is final," Silva growled. "Now return to your duties. That's an order." McKay broke the connection. The military had incorporated many virtues. In her mind at least, one of the most important was duty. Duty not just to the Corps, but to the billions of people on Earth and across the galaxy, to whom she was ultimately responsible. Now, faced with the conflict between military discipline, the glue that held everything together, and duty, the purpose of it all, what was she supposed to do? The answer, strangely enough, came from Jenkins, who, having been privy to the end of the conversation, jerked at his chain. The action took one of the guards by surprise. He fell as Jenkins again lunged in the direction of the fibre optic connection. He was still trying to regain his feet when the combat form ran out of slack and came up short. Seconds later, the Marines had Jenkins back under control. Having failed to do what he knew was right, and with his chain stretched tight, Jenkins looked imploringly into McKay's eyes. McKay realized that the decision lay in her hands, and although it was horrible, almost beyond comprehension, it was so simple. So simple that even the grotesquely ravaged Jenkins knew where his duty lay. Slowly, deliberately, the Marine crossed the deck to the point where the guard stood. She told him to take a break. She took one last look around, and triggered a plasma grenade. Jenkins, still unable to speak, managed to mouth the words, "Thank you." Silva was too many decks removed to feel the explosion, or hear the muffled thump, but he was able to witness the results firsthand. Someone yelled, "The controls are gone." The deck tilted as the Truth and Reconciliation did a nose over, and Wellesley made one last comment. "You taught her well, Major. Of that you can be proud." The Truth and Reconciliation, having just begun its ascent, nosedived into Installation 04. The bow struck. A series of explosions rippled into the length of the hull, and the ship, First Lieutenant Melissa McKay, Jenkins, and everyone else aboard, ceased to exist.